I want you to look at the person you trust the most. Now, ask yourself, if they handed you the keys to a palace in a land you had never seen, would you give them your life savings? In 1822, hundreds of decent, hardworking people did exactly that. They didn't buy land. They bought a lie so perfect that even when they were dying in the mud, they refused to believe it was a fake. Today, we journey into the heart of the greatest exit scam in human history. The story of Gregor MacGregor and the fake country of Poyais. It is a story that teaches us why the human heart is so easily blinded by the promise of a paradise that is on the map. Have you ever dreamed of escaping it all? Starting fresh in a tropical paradise? What if I told you there was a country untouched by the old world's chaos, with fertile lands, rivers of gold, and a government ready to welcome you with open arms? In the 1820s, this wasn't just a dream. It was a promise sold to hundreds of eager Britons. The only problem? This country didn't exist. This is the incredible and tragic story of the Poyais scheme, one of the most audacious financial scams in history. And at its center was a man as charismatic as he was deceitful. Gregor MacGregor. So, who was Gregor MacGregor? Born in Scotland in 1786, he was a man of immense ambition. He served in the British Army, but his career was unremarkable. Craving status and glory, he traveled to South America, the New World, to join the wars of independence against Spain. He styled himself a general, a freedom fighter, and claimed connections to South American heroes like Simon Bolivar. While his actual military achievements were modest at best, MacGregor was a master of self-promotion. He returned to London not as a failed soldier, but as a conquering hero, and he came bearing an incredible gift. He announced himself as the Cacique, or prince, of a newly independent nation on the Mosquito Coast of Central America, a country he called Poyais. He described it in breathtaking detail. Poyais was a paradise on earth. Its capital, St. Joseph, was a thriving port city, with a grand opera house, a domed cathedral, and elegant boulevards. The soil was so rich you could harvest 3 maize crops a year. The rivers were said to be filled with gold nuggets, and the forests teemed with valuable timber. To a post-Napoleonic war, Britain suffering from economic depression, this sounded like a ticket to heaven. People were desperate for new opportunities, for a chance at wealth and a better life, and MacGregor was there to sell it to them. He didn't just tell stories, he created an entire reality. He published a 350-page guidebook to Poyais, complete with detailed maps, climate reports, and lists of native flora and fauna. This wasn't some flimsy pamphlet. It was a convincing, professionally produced document filled with seemingly credible information. He gave interviews to major newspapers, which reported his tales as fact. He even had ballads and songs composed about the wonders of Poyais, sung in London's pubs and theaters. MacGregor's performance was flawless. He opened a Poyaisian legation, an embassy, in London. He designed a flag, a coat of arms, and even printed Poyaisian currency, beautiful, ornate banknotes that people eagerly exchanged for their hard-earned British pounds. He was creating a nation out of thin air, and the public was buying it, literally. The next step was to sell land. MacGregor established the Poyaisian Land Office and began selling plots to aspiring settlers. For a few shillings an acre, you could become a landowner in this new Eden. He sold titles of nobility and positions in the Poyaisian government. Doctors, lawyers, and skilled craftsmen were all recruited with promises of prestigious roles in the new colony. Then came the biggest masterstroke: finance. MacGregor sought a loan on the London Stock Exchange for the government of Poyais. He was looking for £200,000, which is equivalent to tens of millions of dollars today. Armed with his elaborate guidebook, his glowing press coverage, and his sheer, unshakable confidence, he succeeded. The Poyaisian bonds became a hot commodity, eagerly snapped up by investors who believed they were funding the development of a burgeoning new nation. MacGregor was now rich beyond his wildest dreams. But the scam didn't stop there. He needed to make it look real. So, he chartered ships to take the first waves of settlers to their new home. In late 1822 and early 1823, 2 ships, the Honduras Pequot and the Kennersley Castle, set sail from London, carrying around 250 hopeful colonists. They had sold their homes, packed their possessions, and invested their life savings in the dream of Poyais. On board, they carried Poyaisian dollars, useless pieces of paper they believed would be the currency of their new lives. Imagine their journey, weeks at sea, filled with anticipation and hope. They were dreaming of their new farms, of the grand city of St. Joseph, of a future free from hardship. And then they arrived. Instead of the bustling port city they had been promised, they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just a dense, impenetrable, mosquito-infested jungle. There was no St. Joseph, no opera house, no fertile fields. The Mosquito Coast was a wild, undeveloped wilderness. The land grants they held were worthless. The Poyaisian dollars were just paper. They were stranded, thousands of miles from home, with dwindling supplies and no means of survival. The reality was a nightmare. The settlers were ravaged by tropical diseases like malaria and yellow fever. They faced starvation. Their beautiful dream had turned into a desperate fight for survival in a hostile land. One survivor later wrote, "There is no such place as St. Joseph's. Nothing has been done here. It is a complete trick." A passing ship eventually discovered the desperate survivors and took some to a British settlement in Belize. But by then, it was too late for many. Of the 250 people who'd sailed with such high hopes, more than half, over 180 men, women, and children, perished in the jungle. When the news of the disaster finally trickled back to London, the bubble burst. The Poyaisian bonds crashed. The public was outraged. But what about Gregor MacGregor, the mastermind behind it all? You might expect him to be arrested, tried, and imprisoned for the rest of his life. But MacGregor was a slippery character. When the scandal broke, he had already fled to France. There, he tried to pull the exact same scam on French investors. He was arrested, but incredibly, he was acquitted. His lawyers argued that he wasn't a conman, but simply an optimistic developer whose plans had gone awry. He eventually returned to Britain, was briefly imprisoned, but got off with a light sentence. He continued to try and revive his Poyais scheme for years, a testament to his unbelievable audacity. Finally, in his old age, he moved to Venezuela, where he managed to convince the government that he was a hero of their independence. They awarded him a general's pension, and he died a respected man in 1845. He never truly faced justice for the lives he destroyed. The Poyais scheme stands as a powerful reminder of the human capacity for both belief and deception. How could so many people be fooled so completely? Part of it was the desperation of the times. But the real engine of the scam was Gregor MacGregor himself. He wasn't just selling land. He was selling a story. A powerful, seductive story of hope, prosperity, and a new beginning. He understood that if you tell a lie that's big enough, and tell it with enough conviction and detail, people will want to believe it. It's a cautionary tale that's still relevant today. In an age of online scams and get-rich-quick schemes, the story of Poy reminds us to be critical, to ask questions, and to remember that if something seems too good to be true, it almost certainly is. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you miss our next dive into history. That's most incredible tales. See you next time. When the settlers finally saw the shores of what they thought was Poyais, the silence was deafening. There were no white stone buildings. There was no opera house. There wasn't even a pier to dock the ships. All they saw was endless, impenetrable jungle and a shoreline of mud. Yet, the power of a lie is so strong that many of them didn't believe their eyes. They thought they had simply been dropped off at the wrong part of the coast. This is what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. When your reality contradicts your deepest beliefs, it is often easier to deny reality than to admit you were fooled. The settlers set up tents on the beach and waited for the prince or his representatives to find them. They clutched their Poyaisian currency and their land grants, waiting for the miracle to begin. But the only things that arrived were the mosquitoes and the rain. The conditions were horrific. The tropical heat was a furnace, and the humidity rotted their clothes and their spirits. Without the infrastructure MacGregor had promised, they had no clean water and no shelter from the torrential storms. Soon, the New World diseases began to strike malaria and yellow fever. The very people who had dreamed of being lords were now begging for a scrap of dry bread in the mud. There was a deep sadness in this part of the story. These were not stupid people. They were hopeful people. And hope, when misplaced, can be the most dangerous thing in the world. As the proverb says, contentment is a treasure that never perishes. But these people had traded their contentment for a mirage. They had risked everything on a man's word, and that word was hollow. One of the most tragic figures was a young man who had been appointed as the official banker of Poyais. He had brought chests of Poyaisian notes, ready to start the nation's economy. When he realized there was no bank, no city, and no people to trade with, he sank into a deep despair. He eventually took his own life on that beach. The weight of the lie was simply too much for his soul to carry. Even as they were dying, some settlers refused to blame MacGregor. They blamed the ship captains or the local weather. They held on to the sunk cost fallacy, the idea that because they had invested so much, it had to be true. This is a warning for us in our financial lives. When an investment is failing, the hardest thing to do is admit we made a mistake and walk away with what little we have left. Eventually, a passing ship from British Honduras discovered the survivors. They were shocked to find a group of well-dressed Europeans starving to death in a swamp. The rescuers took them to Belize, but for many, it was too late. Out of the 250 settlers who sailed, fewer than 50 survived to return to England. The Prince of Poyais had sent 200 people to their graves for the sake of his own bank account. When the news reached London, the public was outraged. But MacGregor was gone. He had already fled to France. You would think that such a man would hide in shame, but MacGregor was a different kind of predator. He began to do the exact same thing in Paris. He started selling Poyaisian bonds to the French public. He believed that the human appetite for a lie was infinite, and for a while, he was right. The French authorities were more suspicious than the British. They noticed that a large number of people were applying for passports to a country they had never heard of. They arrested MacGregor and put him on trial. But here is the most incredible part. He was acquitted. His lawyers argued that he was a visionary whose plans had simply been poorly executed. The king of lies walked free once again. This teaches us about the charisma gap. We often forgive the flaws in a person's logic if they possess enough charm and confidence. We want to believe in the great man, and we ignore the trail of wreckage he leaves behind. MacGregor didn't just understand money. He understood the human need for a leader to follow, even if that leader is walking toward a cliff. It makes me wonder about our world today. We see charismatic leaders in finance and technology who promise us a new world every day. They use the same language of disruption and utopia that MacGregor used. The tools have changed. We have social media instead of leather-bound guidebooks, but the psychology is identical. We are still the same creatures, looking for a paradise that requires no work and no waiting. As an old man, I've learned that the most reliable path is usually the most boring one. Wealth is built through patience, balance, and a healthy dose of skepticism. If a river is said to run with gold, it's probably because someone is standing upstream, throwing in brass. The story of Poyais is a reminder that the most dangerous lie is the one that tells us we can have it all without paying the price. Gregor MacGregor eventually returned to Venezuela, where he died with a military pension, never truly paying for his crimes. He left behind a legacy of ruined families and a name that became synonymous with fraud. But the ghost of Poyais didn't die with him. It lives on every time someone tries to sell a dream that has no substance. It lives on in every pump and dump scheme and every fraudulent investment fund. Why does this story matter to you today? Because the king of lies is still out there, though his face and his name change. He is the person telling you that you can retire in a year if you just follow this one secret strategy. He is the voice that tells you that this time is different. But as we have seen, it is never different. The laws of reality, of seed and harvest, of effort and reward cannot be cheated forever. The bridge model of storytelling tells us that there is a gap between where we are and where we want to be. MacGregor built a bridge made of air and convinced people to walk across it. In your own financial journey, make sure the bridge you are building is made of stone. Make sure it is anchored in facts, in history, and in common sense. If someone offers you a bridge to a paradise you haven't earned, be very careful. There is an old proverb that says, "A fool and his money are soon parted." But I prefer to say that a hopeful heart without a grounded mind is a target. It is not a crime to be hopeful. It is a beautiful thing to want a better life for your family. But you must trust in God, but tie your camel. As the wise ones say, do your research. Ask the hard questions. Don't let your desire for the opera house blind you to the reality of the swamp. The survivors of Poyais never fully recovered. Even when they returned to London, they were often mocked for being so gullible. That is the second tragedy of a scam. It steals your dignity. It makes you lose faith in yourself and in others. That is a price far higher than any amount of money. Protecting your financial health is about more than just numbers. It's about protecting your peace and your ability to trust. In my 60 years, I've seen many Poyais events. I've seen people lose their homes chasing a mirage, and every time, the pattern is the same. The lure of the shortcut, the charm of the leader, and the refusal to see the truth until it's too late. But I've also seen people who built slowly, who were content with enough, and who found a true paradise in their own backyard. The lesson of Gregor MacGregor is not that we should never take risks. It is that we should never take risks on things we don't understand based on the words of people we don't truly know. Diversification, patience, and skepticism are the walls that protect your castle. Don't tear them down just because someone outside is playing a beautiful tune on a flute. As you move forward in your week, I want you to look at your goals. Are they based on the slow, steady growth of a tree? Or are you waiting for a river of gold to appear? If you find yourself tempted by a Poyais, remember the families on that beach in 1822. Remember the banker with his useless currency. Remember that a real country doesn't need a national anthem to be worth living in. I hope this story inspires you to be the master of your own map. Don't let anyone else draw the borders of your future. Be honest with yourself about what is real and what is a dream. And most importantly, find value in the world you already inhabit. The grass may seem greener in Poyais, but at least the grass in your own yard is real. Thank you for spending this time with me. It is my hope that by looking into the mirrors of the past, we can see the path to a clearer future. The King of Lies only has power if we give him our attention and our greed. Let us keep our hearts warm, but our heads cool. Until next time, stay grounded, stay wise, and remember that the best investment you will ever make is in your own character.